This morning, the growing COVID crisis in Texas. Austin has the highest positivity rate in the country. Mayor Steve Adler is with us from the capital city. From the White House, the U.S. Surgeon General joins us. Is there common ground to find with the people who refuse to wear face masks? And is he going to send his own 3 children back to school next month? 2 questions we will ask. Hundreds of thousands of Texas restaurant jobs will not return, and they say the governor is needlessly putting others in a tough spot. The president of the Texas Restaurant Association is calling into our program. And Joe Biden closing in on a running mate. Is there one, though, who would either help or hurt him in Texas? We'll ask on the roundtable.
Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley starts now.
Good Sunday morning to you this holiday weekend. A lot to get to, but let's begin with the top political headlines in our state. Division inside the Republican Party of Texas may be at its most visible in years. The Fort Worth Star-Telegram even said there's a Hate Greg Abbott club now that has emerged. Remember, in a recent audio recording, the conservative group Empower Texans made fun of Abbott for being in a wheelchair. Now the governor is hitting back and endorsing the person who's running against an Empower Texans candidate in Granbury. In Dallas, at least 3 people arrested during the recent protests have now filed a class action lawsuit against Dallas and Dallas County, claiming the state's anti-rioting laws are unconstitutional. And we still do not know what school will look like next month, but we know this: the STAR test is coming back. The Austin American-Statesman first reported this. Parents are upset because they worry students are behind, considering schools have been closed. We like to brag on ourselves here in Texas, but here is one statistic nobody likes. The positivity rate for COVID cases in Austin is the highest in the country. That means of the number of COVID tests given there in Austin, more people have tested positive than anywhere else. The mayor there is considering a month-long shutdown. Austin city limits has just been canceled. And what will happen to the UT football program a little later this fall? Inside Texas Politics begins this morning in the capital city with the mayor there, Steve Adler. Mayor, thanks for the time. Let's start with this 35-day stay-at-home order you are discussing. Is there support for that, and why that number of days?
Well, I'm throwing it out to see if there could be some support for it. What we asked the modelers and the scientists to solve for is, what is the least amount of time we would have to go into shutdown? If we were going to go into shutdown, we wanted to come out of it with a set day people would know. We wanted to come out of it so that schools could open in the fall, so we could get a restart, a second chance on how you open up the economy, this time to take advantage of the lessons that were learned in May and June and realize that we want to open up the economy, but it's going to look a lot different than it looked back in January and February. 35 days was the minimum number of days the modelers said we would need to go into shutdown in order to tamp back the virus, to be in a strong enough position to be able to open up the economy with significantly greater controls, masking, social distancing.
And when do you think that you might make that decision?
Right now, the trajectory in Austin would indicate to us that if we don't do something about the trajectory we're on, we could be running out of hospital capacity within the next 2 weeks. ICUs potentially before that. We've given the order to start opening up the convention center as a field hospital. So these numbers are going up. The doubling rate is coming down. And what we're looking at is not dissimilar to what's happening right now in Houston and Dallas and in San Antonio.
Yeah, statewide indeed. Before the pandemic, though, let's talk about City Hall. Austin was looking at a balanced budget. Then the coronavirus came and hit. A week from Monday, council is going to get its first look at the proposed budget, is my understanding. Can you give me an idea what kind of shortfall you anticipate the budget having now? And will that mean, potential salary cuts, layoffs, or reduce services?
We'll get the manager's budget on July 13th, and that'll lay out a lot of those answers for us. When we heard from our finance people several weeks ago, the estimate, I think, was about $40 million upside down this fiscal year. maybe another 25 billion upside down next fiscal year. But that was early, and that was, I think, when people thought we'd be getting back into a more normal flow sooner than it looks like we will. We have not had to discuss laying off anyone at this point, and I hope that's something we do not have to do.
Obviously, some of the things that have happened in Austin. South by Southwest was canceled. Most recently, we heard about Austin city limits being canceled. This is, taking a toll on everything from sales tax to hotel occupancy taxes, et cetera. Here's a big question a lot of people have. UT football come this fall. What do you think is going to happen with 95,000 fans in the stadium? Will that be open? Do you think games will be played there? I can't imagine a world without a vaccine where you put 95,000 people into a stadium. And one of the reasons to do that is if you have 100 people out of 95,000 that are sick. And right now in our city, the infectivity rate is north of 10%. So you have 95,000 people in there, you're going to have more than 10,000 people that are sick. They're milling about with other people. When everybody goes home that night, who was it that was at that game that did not come into contact with somebody who has the virus? Wouldn't be very many. And if you end up at a game like that where you have 20, 30,000 people that are infected, you're in a world of hurt. So I don't see it with 95,000. Maybe if it was spaced out, but boy, that's a hard thing to do. And frankly, I'm not sure how teams get through an entire fall in that kind of proximity and keep everybody safe. So I'm focused on the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks here in Austin, and that's what I'll stay. Of course, we are looking a ways down the road. Mayor, thanks for the time. We appreciate it. We'll check back in with you as well. Good luck to you guys.
Thank you. Be safe.
Let's back up now and get a broader view. Dr. Anthony Fauci in D.C. said he is concerned that states like Texas have, quote, skipped over some things. Well, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick took issue with that, saying in an interview on Fox that Texas has not skipped over anything. Patrick then added that Dr. Fauci has, quote, been wrong every time on every issue. The Lieutenant Governor issued a statement later asking why Fauci had nothing to say about mistakes that were made in New York and even in California. All of this has gotten people talking, though. Ross Ramsey is the co-founder and the executive editor of the Texas Tribune in Austin. And you guys wrote about the story the other day. Good morning to you, Ross.
Good morning, Jason. How are you?
Doing well. Is there any kind of political strategy with what the governor said, the lieutenant governor said, rather?
Sure. It's straight out of the Trump playbook. He's playing the liberty card against the health card. It's a little bit dissonant with what the governor has been saying, though. Texas numbers, as you know, have been climbing steadily for a couple of weeks now, setting records day after day. And the governor's trying to get people to settle down, put on masks and everything. The lieutenant governor's attacking the medical people who've been telling us to settle down and put on masks.
Let's talk about bars. They are now suing the state after the governor ordered they be closed. Governor Abbott caved with Shelley Luther in Dallas and her hair salon. How do you think that this bar issue might play out? What the courts might do?
You have to wonder if the bars are the new haircuts, and whether going out is different. You've seen pictures, you've run them, we've run them, people crowded into bars without masks on. It's a really social place, and it's a spreader place. And bars say they need to stay open to keep their livelihood, to keep their employees going. The health officials say it's too dangerous, and it looks like the judges are going to have to sort this out.
Yeah, we'll wait and see what the judges say. Ross, thanks a lot. Back to you in just a moment. Okay. Coming up, the U.S. Surgeon General is with us from the White House. Is there common ground to find with people who refuse to wear face masks? And is he going to send his 3 kids back to school next month? 2 questions we'll ask. Plus, the Texas Restaurant Association says Governor Abbott is putting small businesses in a tough spot. We have questions for the president of that organization when we come back. The situation in Houston will likely get worse before it gets better. COVID is flourishing there in the state's largest city, and scientists saw it coming. But is the situation really as dire as headlines suggest? We'll talk to one of the top docs there on this week's episode of Y'all-itics. What does he know that others might not? Grab your mobile phone, aim its camera at this QR code on your screen, and it will take you directly to the latest episode of our Y'all-itics political podcast. You can pause us here if you need to get your phone if it's in the other room. And while you are there, take a moment and subscribe to Y'all-itics as well. Now to the U.S. Surgeon General. Dr. Jerome Adams once lived in Texas and has a little more insight on our state and what is now happening here than maybe others in D.C. Dr. Adams, thanks for the time. We'll get right to it here. For weeks, you have supported wearing face masks. It's all over your social media feeds. But Texas is one of those states that is not making masks mandatory. Is that a mistake?
Well, that's a great question, and here's one of the challenges. Our country was founded by people who didn't want to be told what to do by the government. I understand that saying something is mandatory is in many cases the best way to make sure that they won't do it. But if you want people to actually do something, you need to help them understand why they should be doing it and the benefits that are going to accrue to them. So here's what I would say to the people of Texas. If you want to see the Dallas Cowboys play again in person, if you want to see the Houston Texans play again in person, if we want to get back to some sense of normalcy with church, with school, with businesses, then the fastest way to make that happen is by wearing a face covering. It's a small inconvenience that will actually increase our freedom because it will make sure we don't have to shut down. It will facilitate a faster reopening, and we'll have more options because we'll have less disease spread.
Let me pick up on that, Dr. Adams. You said, you went on to say that, we should all try to better understand why some people resist health recommendations and then speak to their concerns and find common ground. It seems, though, that health experts like yourself have been pretty clear here that masks help. Where is common ground, though? Well,
people understand, I think, that masks help in general. They don't see how it specifically helps them. And that's why, again, I want people to know that if you want that restaurant down the street to open up and to stay open, then we need to follow those basic public health precautions. If we make sure we're social distancing, make sure that we are wearing our face coverings, then we'll be able to go out and get some barbecue. And I lived in Texas for a while in Laredo. I love me some good barbecue, but I want these restaurants to open more than anyone else. I want our communities to reopen, and the way we do that is by making sure we follow these public health precautions.
You're speaking our language here, the Dallas Cowboys barbecue. I can tell you've lived here, or at least been to Texas quite a bit. I want to ask you one more topic on COVID. You're a father of three. You see what's going on here in Texas. Right now, would you send your children back to school when school resumes in 5 to 6 weeks from now?
Fantastic question, and it's a conversation my wife and I are having constantly along with the kids. One of the important things to know is a lot can change in just a few weeks, so it is premature now to say what will happen in June. But what we want schools to do is to make sure we're doing everything possible in communities to lower the prevalence of disease first and foremost. We want schools to understand the things they can do to keep students safe. Things like making sure you're doing as much education outside as possible, ensuring social media is utilized, and the virtual media and online communication is used as much as possible. Making sure people have ways to get to school that don't include packing on a bus, so biking to school, walking to school, driving to school. There are things that we can do to make the school environment safer. Also important to know that young people are not as high of a risk for getting or having complications from or spreading COVID as older adults are. Doesn't mean they're at no risk. We want to make sure we're doing everything possible to keep them safe. But I'm optimistic that in many areas across the country, we will be able to have school this year. It will look different than what it did at this time last year, but it's important that we get these kids back in the educational environment.
All right, Dr. Adams, thank you for the time.
Thank you, and remember, Texas, you have the ability to control whether or not we reopen and how quickly if you just do those basic things that we recommend. Wearing a mask will help you get back to normal.
The Texas Restaurant Association says Governor Abbott is putting small businesses in a tough spot, making servers and others enforce a face mask policy that Governor Abbott does not want to enact. What's worse, there is concern that some cities might further restrict restaurant operations as the virus continues its spread, and all that could create dire consequences for many of these companies. Emily Williams-Knight is the president and CEO of the Texas Restaurant Association. Emily, thanks for the time. Tell us what another shutdown would do to the restaurant industry in our state.
Yeah, it'd be catastrophic. With the first shutdown, we're still projecting about 30% of our 50,000 restaurants won't make it through. A second full shutdown, I think, would absolutely paralyze the industry. And more than half, if not 75%, we don't think would make it through. And That's very significant, but what's also significant is that we're 51% of the food dollar, and we know the first time around that we had a hard time feeding Texans, and we don't want them all crowding back into grocery stores. And so we're also fearful of just what it would do to the food supply, again, to citizens across Texas.
Considering cases are surging right now in the state, how likely do you think a second shutdown might be?
We've been in very close contact with Governor Abbott's office and sort of walked through our reopening together. I don't know about a statewide, obviously, shutdown, but I do think there could be consideration for hotspots or areas that are starting to develop of a concern.
Emily, your group has also been asking the governor to mandate that people wear masks and not put that responsibility on businesses and restaurants to do. The governor, though, has said that not every part of the state needs to do that. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I think you really put small business in a tough place. I think that we certainly support the use of masks. There's growing evidence that masks will help to slow the spread. If we help slow the spread, obviously our economy gets to open more quickly. That's good for business. Without having a statewide mandate, you're asking a frontline employee to have that encounter with a guest who may or may not want to follow that rule. And there is no ramification for the public today. It just actually falls on the business. And so we have deep concern. We don't feel like that's the role of small business. We'll do everything we can, but we certainly are clear with our members if we get to the point of confrontation or putting someone in harm's way, that it's not a path we want to go down.
I want to ask you about the Texas Restaurant Survival Plan. You guys gave a plan to the governor and to state leaders saying this is what we need in order to move forward as an industry. What $66 billion industry in our state. How has the governor and state leaders, how have they responded yet?
Our plan is everything from tax relief to securing a relief fund that would help these restaurants, I guess, maybe procure and pay for this PPE, the sanitizing, the equipment. Many of them are having to reconfigure their restaurants for delivery and takeout. All of that cost adds up to businesses in a sector that was closed for 6 weeks and now is still most of them running on 50% occupancy just due to social distancing. And so one of the elements of the plan also is liability protection. We really feel that that's something that the state or federal government needs to come in on to make sure that our restaurants that are operating and following the guidelines do have some type of safe harbor. We know that we're in the heat of the crisis again, so we're being very thoughtful of Governor Abbott and his team, but we're really hopeful that they will respond to the proposal and start to put some of these elements in place.
All right. Emily, thanks for the insight. We appreciate it. Good luck to you and your members.
Great. Thank you so much.
We are weeks away from Joe Biden selecting a running mate. He promised it would be a woman, but is there one that might help him or hurt him in Texas? We're going to start there next on the Roundtable.
This is Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley.
Time now for Reporters Roundtable to put the headlines in perspective. Ross is back. Bud Kennedy is here from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. And, of course, Bernadine Steptoe, WFA's political producer, joins us each week. Ross, we'll start with you as always. Joe Biden had a fantastic week last week. I'm thinking if I would be on the Biden campaign. But now, he's probably, weeks away from potentially naming a running mate. Is there anybody out there that might help him or hurt him in our state?
I think if he goes really far left on the vice presidential candidate, it could hurt him here. But I got to say, Texas is down the list. If you're worried about winning Texas as a Democratic presidential nominee, you're in pretty good shape. And he's going to be trying to satisfy other states before he worries about what works or doesn't work in a state he's not expected to win.
That's a good point, Bud, even though this might be kind of a closer state than usual.
I think Kamala Harris is probably the favorite for Texas Democrats. Susan Rice is probably the best suited to be president. But it's really tough to tell. Stacey Abrams fires up voters. But, like Ross said, he's not picking this to win Texas.
Bernadine, any names out there you particularly like or think that he might have trouble winning over Texans with?
Well, I think that I agree with them in terms of that you don't worry about Texas. But I think that he's going to be pressured somewhat to choose an African American because the African American vote is what really put him to where he is now. And also, look at Alabama, where you have Stacey Adams. She was a huge part of him winning that state or doing as well in that state. So I think that he's going to be hard pushed for it to be an African American female as Senator Harris, but it may be someone who we don't even not on our radar.
How about Ross? How about Michelle Obama? I've floated that name out there a few times.
Everything I've ever seen her interviewed about said she was pretty glad to get out of there, and I'd be very surprised if she went back. And you never want to name a vice president who's got more star power than you do.
Well, that's a great point. She is very popular. But I want to ask you about, we're in the middle of an exhausting, long year. After the November elections, do you think we're going to get to a point where we hear a number of retirements from elected officials who say, I've had enough, walking away?
Well, that's this is a real fatiguing on all of us, and you're starting to hear that there are a lot of people won't come back. This is such a hard job right now, and it's a lonely job. And for a lot of elected officials who are in their 60s, 70s, 80s, they're doing all their public meetings by Zoom from home. They can't campaign. They can't even go to their meetings. They wonder how effective they can really be. A lot of I think the average age in Congress and the Texas Senate is in the 60s and 70s. I'm not going to name names right now, but I think there are a lot of local officials who won't run for re-election.
Bernadine?
Well, you're going to find some who won't win re-election, because if you look at the national polls, the Democrats are doing very well. But I think that at this point, you could probably find some fatigue among the incumbents, but I think that most of them are going back if they win.
You think so?
Yes, I do. Because keep in mind that a lot of them have already said that they wouldn't go for re-election or they wouldn't go back.
Yeah.
So anybody else who comes forward now would be new names.
All right, Ross, final word on this.
I think the thing to watch is how many of the people who are trying to get back don't get back in November. Whether they want to volunteer, that's already gone by. Now it's up to the voters, and I think voters might retire some.
All right, guys. Thank you guys very much. We appreciate it. Thanks for watching as well. We'll see you again next Sunday. Have a good weekend.